But I want to thank you. Of course, Jacob is sponsoring along with his brother in memory of their father, Albert. Albert's the son sponsoring this whole series, which is pretty much coming to an end. So tonight we're sort of wrapping up. I don't know if there'll be one class after that. I'll let Dr. Mark decide, and I'll make you host, which I haven't done yet, and then you can get started. Okay?
Okay, very good.
Okay. Thank you.
On what is it, May 19th, um, 2025. Hello, everyone. I want to begin quickly. Just something David, he mentioned at the last class, and I expressed my doubt to look into it. That Reb Chaim Zimmerman was Rosh Hashiva at Beis Midrash Torah. Well, David pointed out that was what was on the Hebrew Wikipedia, but it's no longer on Hebrew Wikipedia because I changed it. But I knew it was not true. I confirmed this with Rabbi Kefet. Skokie, is called Beis Midrash Torah. So someone got confused. And as I said, I confirmed it with Rabbi Kefet. He was never there. Um, Before we move on to the Seidman controversy, which we're going to focus on today, there's one more thing about mamzeris I want to tell you about because it's actually quite interesting. And there's those who follow, I guess, the Bate Din in Israel notice something interesting. And there's been a few articles, including one lengthy article recently, about how today mamzeros, I mean, it always was hard to find, but pretty much they've gotten rid of it. In fact, the lengthy article on this topic is by Amichai Radziner, and his article is titled as follows. עד שכמעט לא נמצא ממזר מהתורה רק כשהיו אביו ואמו חלושים בית האסורים. Basically, that they've made it that today there's no case of mamzeros unless you have, let's say, a married woman and a man locked together in a jail the whole time. So physically, the only person she could have been pregnant from was this individual. They found so many heterim in so many ways, and really one who was pushing this is Rabbi Massas of Chief Rabbi of Jerusalem. We've had classes on him, and Rav Avadia went along with all this. But actually, Rav Avadia came up with a solution himself. Now, although he, it's hard to explain this because he mentions that he had this idea already early on, but it's never dealt with during the Langer dispute. The first time, according to Radziner, we see it is in 1990 in the Tshuva, and then he repeats it again and again. And what I'm going to tell you now, if this is the standard halacha, and Rav Avadia cites it again and again in chapter 11 of Yabiya Omer, then the Langer case is obviously the kids are not mamzerim. But the problem is that he was on the Beis Din that declared them mamzerim. So I think there's been a change of his position. Now, and Radziner discusses this view a lot. I should have already mentioned this. The Hafla. Rav Pinchas Eliyahu Horowitz, the Rav of Frankfurt. That's where the word Hafla from his parish on Gemara comes from. But he also wrote a parish on Chumash called Panim Yafos, which itself is a problem now. What Rav Avadia is going to say, according to many, because since when do we derive halacha from a parish on Chumash? But if it's a Gadol B'Yisrael like the Hafla who says in his parish on Chumash this is the halacha, then I think you would. So what does the Panim Yafos say? Now, Rav Avadia said, quotes this, as I said a number of times. I'll just read you now in volume 11 of Yabiya Omer, Even Ezer, number 3. And he dealt with the case of Mamzerus. And this is what the Hafla says in the Panim Yafos, and Rav Avadia relies on this again and again, that the idea that we say, Rov Be'ilos Achar Habal, that most we assume that most sexual relations are with the husband, not with someone else. That so what does the Hafla say? He says this doesn't mean that because the husband is living with the wife, or that in reality shehu ragil etzla bebios harbe yoter me'acherim, that he's sexual relations with her more than others. No, the Hafla says even if a woman is living with another man and not her husband, but nisyachet ima habal el rak pamachas, but she was alone with her husband even one time. Despite so clearly, if she's living with another man, you'd say rov bilos with this other man. But even if one time in the period we're talking about, she was with her husband, Toliness Havad Babal. We assume that the Vlad is the husband's. And by the way, when I say that doesn't mean she had sexual relations with him. That just means she was in a situation where she could have had. Um, and by the way, it doesn't even mean that we identify that they were alone together. If he was in the same city, if even if he was overseas, maybe he would have come back. I mean, there's all sorts of ways to do this. And and he says because this is it's like a gezeres hakosov of the Torah that we assume that if there's a husband in the picture, that is, if he's not in jail, let's say in Russia or something, if he's in the picture and he physically could be with her at one point, then we assume that that's what it is. We own the whole idea of rov bilot acharabal, most sexual relations go after the husband. That refers to a halachic husband. It does not refer to the idea that you're living together. So this is an unbelievable chiddush here. Of course, people disagree with this. Absolutely, people disagree. But this is an unbelievable chiddush because in the Langer case, she was never considered married to Langer because she never got divorced from Barakovsky, and Barakovsky was living in Israel. So according to the Panim Yafos, we would have to assume that the child is Barakovsky because that's we don't say Rov Bilot, or if not Barakovsky, someone else. Uh, so this is, as I said, a great novel view, which is used by Ravad Yosef, and that's where you get the title of Radziner's article, because once you adopt the Panim Yafos, it's pretty much impossible to have a case of mamzeris unless, as the title of his article says, the man and woman, that is the married woman and the other man, are locked together in a prison, and no one else can get in or out. That really puts an end to the issue of mamzeris practically, and that's why you don't really have it anymore in the Bate Din in Israel. And it is a change. Make no mistake about it. It's a change in how the Bate Din operate. Okay. Now, we're going to move on to the other controversy that Rav Goren was involved in 2 years before the Langer case, and that's the Seidman case. And it's important to look at, not just because it's interesting, because the Langer case wouldn't have exploded the way it did had it not been for the Seidman case. Some of the personalities are the same, and with the Seidman case, Rabbanim in the more traditional circles saw Rav Goren as willing to play fast and loose with accepted halacha in order to advance political purposes. And so the Langer case really goes on the heels of the Seidman case. So what's the Seidman case? So, well, it occurs in 1970, and as I says, it inflamed passion so that when the Langer case came on the scene, this was like deja vu, or as what does Woody Allen say? Deja vu all over again. Before, though, looking at this, I need to tell you about something because the case we're going to deal with now is deals with conversion. There are two approaches to conversion. I always knew this ever since I got involved with this, and now it's become very obvious from this big book, Masoras Hagir from Eliezer Melamed. Look how thick this book is. This book is 896 pages. And I have to praise this book a lot because this book came out just like last year, actually 2 years ago. I thought I knew conversion very, very well. I wrote about it, I've investigated it, and lo and behold, I find in this book numerous sources I had no knowledge about. But not only that, even America. I was certain I knew all the interesting psukim about Rabbanim in America, including these out-of-the-way sources. How they found these sources, I have no idea. But everything I knew, plus much, much more, is in there. So my chapter, when I finally get around to my book on halachic history in America, the chapter on America is going to be more complete. The one thing they get this wrong in this book, it's edited by Rabbi Mohammed, but he has he mentions 10 people in the introduction who helped. Actually, no, yeah, 10 people, it seems like, Rabbi Machon, and two of them focused on history. They do make one mistake. In discussing America, they give biographies of all these rabbis, and they say that Rabbi X was a member of Agudas Rabbanim, which was close to Agudas Yisrael. And the reason they say this is because they want to show that even Agudas Yisrael rabbis had liberal views on conversion, which is true. Some of them did, but the statement is incorrect. Agudas Rabbanim was not an Agudas Yisrael movement at all. Agudas Rabbanim had no political litmus test, and you had Rosh Soloveitchik, who was the honorary president, and Moshe Feinstein, who was the president. In fact, until you get to until maybe the 50s, most of the rabbis in Agudas Rabbanim were Mizrahi rabbis. Before World War II, absolutely, they almost uniformly, except for Laser Silver, they were all Mizrahi. But what you see in the history is that there are two approaches to conversion. The one, and I don't know if maybe the liberal approach seems to have more followers, but you have many great rabbis in the more traditional approach, conservative, I would say also. One approach is that, yes, thank you, Ramel, my chapter on conversion in America, in my book on Halachas history in America. One approach is that you can convert people even if they're not going to be religious, as long as they're traditional, or as long as they express openness to become more religious, as long as they don't refuse to accept certain mitzvot. The idea is that no one is perfect, and as long as they recognize this is the Torah and this is what they're obligated to do, even if they don't follow it, just like with other Jews, we try to bring them closer to Judaism. As long as they make some sort of commitment to the Jewish people and to Judaism, they don't have to be tzaddikim, and conversion is okay. Look, everyone, the idea that if you sin, you can't, I mean, everyone's going to acknowledge you can sin. If someone were going to convert and say, I don't accept the idea of Lashon Hara, so obviously you can't convert them. But if someone converts and says, I am going to speak Lashon Hara, I'm being realistic, we're not going to say it's not a valid conversion. So how far do you take this? You have another position that says that, especially, at least when it comes to the big mitzvos, even if someone says that they accept the Torah, but it's clear they're not going to follow. When I say not going to follow mitzvos, I know someone's going to say, well, of course they're going to follow mitzvos. They might follow v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. They might follow, they'll give tzedakah. Now, I mean, they're not going to follow, for instance, Shabbos and kashrus and it's like Taras and Mishpacha, or they're not going to, the big things. They're not going to, and we know they're not going to. How do we know? That's going to be the question. Usually you don't know. Some make a distinction between a typical Jew who doesn't look like he's going to change his lifestyle, and one, let's say if his job is to perform on Friday nights as a singer. That already, there's a structural problem, because by definition, even when he's converting, he knows he's going to be Machal Shabbos, not because he wants to or he feels he has the heter, but because he has to. Then they would say that that's no good. In fact, many of the liberal interpretations would say such a conversion is also not good. But you take someone who you convert, and in the week after conversion, they're Machal Shabbos. Maybe they go to shul, maybe they don't. A number of rabbis would say it's a valid conversion because they accepted the fact that this is what's required, and they know that if they violate it, they're violating it, and they know that they're wrong, but they're weak or whatever. I mean, it's up to the judgment of the rabbis. If the rabbis think it's all a joke and they're just doing to get married, but if they're then they wouldn't. But if the rabbis think that they accept it, but they just don't intend themselves to do it, but they think it's a nice thing. And if the rabbis make a mistake and it turns out it's a joke, they still think it's a valid conversion. And then there's the other position that says no, that if they never intended to, let's say, observe the big mitzvos, it's invalid after the fact. You can declare them. If you see them the Shabbos after that, they're driving to McDonald's. You can say it's absolutely not a valid conversion, and you can even sell them your. Rav Yoshev says you can even sell them your chametz on Pesach. And then there's positions in the middle. So those are the two big positions staked out. I'll just add one more point that even without going into this, from many chuvos that the liberal position is held, because you have a number of rabbis who say that you can't convert the people who aren't going to be religious, because then after conversion, they'll be in a worse situation than before conversion. In other words, you convert them, and now they're chayav on Shabbos and kashrus, and they're not observing it, and therefore they're They have to get the punishments for not observing it. Whereas had you not converted them, they'd be a guy, they wouldn't have to follow it. What this shows you is that these rabbis assume it is a valid conversion because they're saying you converted them and now they're not observant. They're in a worse situation than they were before. They're not saying it's not a valid conversion. They're saying it is a valid conversion and you put a stumbling block before the blind. Okay, so with that summary of the two major positions, I want to read you the summary of the Seidman case. And I found this afternoon there's a good, I didn't say anything really on Wikipedia in English, but in Wikipedia in Hebrew, there's a good summary. So let me summarize the summary on the Hebrew Wikipedia. It's a controversy. It begins in 1970. This woman, Helen Seidman, uh, by the way, she was named Helen Shannon, non-Jewish woman from the U.S. with a PhD in biology from the University of Illinois. Um, she comes to Israel in 1964 with her, she broke up with her husband, and she comes to Israel in 1964. Why does she come to Israel? Well, as Rav Goren will say, she had a connection to Israel. She felt connected to Israel. Um, she first went to Kibbutz Mefalsim. Kibbutz Mefalsim, those who follow the news know it's right by Gaza, but it was miraculous. They kept the terrorists out of the kibbutz with unbelievable security. They were able to keep them out. Um, she did not integrate in the kibbutz, and she moved to a different kibbutz, uh, a neighboring kibbutz, Kibbutz Nachal Oz, which is also very much in the news. Unfortunately, we know that Nachal Oz was not as fortunate as Mefalsim, and many people were killed and kidnapped. And if those of you who are listening who have not yet been to Israel, when you go to Israel, just like you can't go to Jerusalem without going to the Kotel, I hold that you can't go to Israel today without going to down south and to the Nova Festival and to see. It's not so simple to get into the kibbutzim unless you're on a fancy group with a fancy group where you give a big donation. These are not tourist sites. So I tried to get in. They didn't let me in because I just hired a driver. But you have to go to it's holy ground. You have to go to where the Nova Festival was. Look, I've walked in Auschwitz and other places, and of course, Jewish blood is there too. But we lived through this. And if you haven't been there to see the pictures and to see family members, I was there, you had family members there. And it won't be the same in 20 years. I mean, there'll still be a memorial, but it won't be as raw. So I encourage everyone to go there. By the way, after I went there, I went to I drove around to a few other places, Sderot, and then I went to Netivot. If you haven't been to Netivot, I encourage you also to go to the Baba Sali's, the kever there, everything they have going on there. It's worth seeing. Okay, so she moves to Nachal Oz, and by the way, because she's an expert in genetics, she was helping them with so Wikipedia says, new agricultural developments. Later, she decides she wants to convert to Judaism. Now, uh, she was told, "You're living on a secular kibbutz. You're not going to be able to convert to Judaism." Now, today, even secular kibbutzim have shuls, but in those days it was different. Um, so nevertheless, she went to Tel Aviv where she studied with a rabbi. She tried to open a conversion file with the rabbinical court in Ashdod, but was rejected, apparently. In 1967, she marries a man on the kibbutz named Seidman, Binyamin Seidman. That's where she gets her name, Seidman, a member of Nachal Oz. She marries him in a civil ceremony in Mexico. Then she has a son, and in October of 67, she has a reform conversion in Tel Aviv, obviously not recognized by the state of Israel. And she tried to register herself after the non-Orthodox conversion, but it didn't work. Now, she then went to the Supreme Court to try to push this through, to try to force it through. And it was becoming a big controversy because the religious Zionist party, Mafdal, said that they will leave the coalition, the government could fall, unless legislation is passed, banning recognition of reform conversions. So this is going to be a crisis, a governmental crisis. And seeking a way out of this crisis, certain religious authorities approached Helen Seidman and asked her to undergo a proper Orthodox conversion. Now, the information on the Wikipedia article is that the sister-in-law of Rav Goren, Dr. Naomi Cohen, she's American, by the way. I knew her through emails. Married Rav Shar Yoshev Cohen. Her Herbert Goldstein, right? Am I correct? That's her father, as I recall, was it her grandfather? I forget. Um, she traveled to Nahal Oz, and she convinces Helen Seidman to convert under the auspices of her brother-in-law, Rav Goren, who at the time was chief rabbi of the IDF. That's the same period that he is exposed to, as we know, the Langer kids. He was slated to become chief rabbi of Tel Aviv shortly after that, or maybe even at this time, but he wasn't yet. Seidman agreed. She registered with the conversion court in Ashdod, and 2 days before her hearing before the Supreme Court, she's brought to Tel Aviv in Rav Goren's car. She's converted by Rav Goren with two military rabbis, and her Hebrew name is given as Rivka. And that day, the Ministry of Religious Affairs issues her a conversion certificate. She withdraws her petition to the Supreme Court. The government doesn't, there's no governmental crisis. Now, what's interesting about this is what happens now. First of all, you might be wondering, what type of conversion is this? We'll get into this. Converting someone who lives on a secular kibbutz who's not Orthodox. Before we even get into it, you should know this happened all the time. This Rav Goren was not unique in this, and Rav Goren is not attacked for this. That's not the focus of it. The focus is one thing in particular. But people were being converted on these kibbutzim, these German tourists and others who came, and they were converted Orthodox while living on the secular kibbutzim and continued to live on the secular kibbutzim. They went to a course and they learned about what it means to be Torah observant, but there never was an expectation that they would be Orthodox the way it is now. This isn't Rav Goren's Chiddush. This was already from the beginning of the state. And I mean, so just so you know that this isn't something invented by Rav Goren. There's going to be a challenge to Rav Goren. No, remember, he's the one who says that Borakovsky's conversion's invalid. We'll see what Rabbi Blech says. So what about how can then he accept all these other conversions that people aren't religious? It's a mistake it's based on a misconception. We'll get back to that. Okay, so the Wikipedia article continues that two appeals were immediately filed with the Rabbinical High Court. There was a man named Tzvi Weinman. He wrote a number of like histories of Agudas Yisrael, things like that. He was a thorn in the side of Rav Goren. He kept bringing court cases against Rav Goren. And he was egged on by people in the Agudas Yisrael. And the other was brought by a Knesset member, a Haredi Knesset member. I believe it was Haredi Knesset member, Shalom Cohen. And this went to the Beis Din Gadol. Who's on the Beis Din Gadol? Rav Yoshev, Rav Goldschmidt, Eliezer Goldschmidt, Rav Tzal Jolti, or Shal Yisraeli. We already know these names, three of these names at least, as people who were involved with the Langer case. What did these judges rule? It says four judges. I don't know why four. It should be three, but maybe one of them dropped out, another one came on. They ruled, again, so it's Rav Jolti, Rav Yisraeli, Rav Yoshev, that Rav Goren has no authority to convert anyone because he's not a member of the Batei Din. He's the chief rabbi of the IDF. And in the state of Israel, the law is that you have to be part of the rabbinic courts. So he has no authority to do this. And they said that the Seidman conversion, therefore, is not regarded as valid unless it's approved by a recognized rabbinical court. So here's a question. I mean, what's this mean? There's nothing in the Shulchan Aruch that you have to be a recognized member of a rabbinical court. If a Satmar based in the state of Israel converts someone, yes, it is not recognized by the state of Israel, but the person's still Jewish. So whenever I hear these things like the state of Israel, the Beis Din doesn't recognize, I'm always wondering, what does that mean, doesn't recognize? Okay, I understand maybe for governmental purposes, but can I sell my chametz, as Rav Yosef said, with an Israelite? Can I sell my chametz to this person? But they said, at least practically, it's not a valid conversion. The next day, June 18th, Rav Ovadia Yosef, who was chief rabbi of Tel Aviv, by now Rav Goren's chief rabbi also, convenes a rabbinical court with Rav Goren and Rav Shalom Mizrahi. We mentioned Rav Shalom Mizrahi. He was one of the Dayanim on the Langer case, the only one other than Rav Eliezer Shapiro who came out publicly in support of Rav Goren. They now form a Beis Din. This is not an IDF Beis Din. This is a Beis Din of the city of Tel Aviv. And they confirm the conversion, stating that she has sincerely accepted the yoke of mitzvos and committed to observing Jewish law. So here you have, it should be the end of it now. Rav Ovadia Yosef, who was never involved in these controversies of the Haredim about conversions, he was involved in other things, Shemitah. So here you have a basin of Rav Ovadia Yosef, unlike the Langer case where Rav Ovadia was opposed to it, although we saw ex post facto, he seemed to accept it. Here, Rav Ovadia is on the Beis Din that converts her. Okay, but you got a problem here. The problem is her husband, Binyamin Seidman, is a kohen, and she's now a convert. And she makes it very clear she's married to him now, civilly, reform, and she's married civilly, and she had the reform conversion, and she's going to remain with him, and he's a kohen. How can you convert someone who's going to be with a kohen? We know that a convert can't be married to a kohen. So that's already the first issue that we're going to have to deal with. But before we even get into it, it's not just Rav Goren. You have Rav Ovadia, the greatest posek in the second half of the 20th century. I mean, when you think about it, maybe him and Ramosha, but certainly after Ramosha's passing, it's hard to. And in terms of significance, taking the long view, 100 years from now, when none of us are here, Rav Ovadia is going to be more significant than Ramosha. Rav Ovadia really, I mean, what he did, it's unbelievable. And Rav Shalom Mizrahi, and they agreed to convert her. Rav Ovadia stated that once Rav Goren did his conversion, it can't be retroactively invalidated. Rav Goren didn't convert her again. Rav Ovadia didn't convert her again. Rav Ovadia just confirmed that this is a valid conversion, and they did it with a Beis Din to establish that it's accepted by the state of Israel. Now, fearing that they were worried that Tzvi Weinman would launch another appeal and destabilize the chief rabbinate, Rav Tzvi Yehuda Kook invites Weinman to his house. I mean, this is a famous story in Merkaz Harav circles. And Weinman, to his credit, went to Rav Tzvi Yehuda's house, and Rav Tzvi Weinman warned him that God is going to punish him, that divine punishment awaits him from getting involved in this and oppressing a convert. And, the chief rabbis of Tel Aviv have already ruled on it. Rav Tzvi Yehuda also summoned, and apparently they went, the big rabbanim of the Supreme Rabbinic Court, one of whom was a Rebbe at Merkaz Harav, Rav Shal Yisraeli. And was he a Rebbe at this time? I think he was a Rebbe. If not, he was a Rebbe. He had later became Rosh Hashiva at Merkaz Harav, and also warned them not to do anything about this. And in the end, Weinman did not go through with the appeal because he says that there's no room for an appeal now because it's a valid Beis Din of the state of Israel. Now, the criticism was launched, first of all, the swift nature of the conversion. Not, at least as far as I can tell, the issue wasn't that she was irreligious as much as it seemed to be a quick conversion. Immediately, basically, she's converted once Naomi Cohen gets involved. Also, and by the way, the Stipler and Rav Shach signing letters saying that, the title of it was how conversion is now a joke. They saw it as a sham conversion. And again, this was the catalyst, really, because for the beginning of the break between Rav Goren and the Haredi Rabbani. But it wasn't just that she was a kohen. She was living in a secular kibbutz where she couldn't observe the mitzvos, so that was an issue, but it wasn't the major issue, as I said. But it still was an issue that those people challenged, how you convert someone it's not like you convert someone who lives in Tel Aviv and can do what they want, and then it turns out not religious. She's living in the secular kibbutz, which means by definition she's not eating kosher. So they said that's a little different than just a private citizen. I mean, how by definition, how can she be observed? She says she accepts the mitzvos, but her situation means she can't accept the mitzvos because the kitchen that she's eating it is not kosher. So that's the summary as I just took it from Wikipedia. Now, um, before even going further, I want to tell you about another case, though you might be unaware of with Rav Gorin. And Rav Eliezer Malamed tells the case as follows. If you look, because Rav Eliezer Malamed is the leader now, the author of the Pinhas Halacha, which any good base medrash will have it. He's the leader of adopting a more liberal approach to conversion, and this book of his is his justification. Um, the story is as follows. Do anyone you maybe you know about it? Ben Gurion, his family. Eliezer Malamed tells two stories. One to show that you can adopt a more liberal approach. One is the Seidman case, and he just says that what Rav Gorin did. We're going to get into the weeds here, the dispute over it, Rav Gorin's justification, etc. But he tells another story, and that's the story of Amos Ben Gurion and Mary. Um, the one of the sons, he had a couple, I don't know if he had three sons, I can't remember, but one of the sons of David Ben Gurion was named Amos. So during World War II, he was in the British Army. He enlisted to fight the Nazis, which all good Jews they did. Then they in Palestine they put a halt to rebellion against the British because there were bigger fish to fry, and we had to deal with the Nazis, except for the Stern Group. The Stern Group, one of the leaders of the Stern Group traveled to Beirut and met with the German ambassador there and said that if they stopped the anti-Semitism in Germany, they would join with the Nazis, to drive the British out. But other than that, it was everyone joined together with the British, and he was an officer in something that the British created called the Jewish Brigade. Now, part of his time during the war, he was in Liverpool. Liverpool at this time, incidentally, Rav Unterman happened to be rabbi of Liverpool. I don't know if the Beatles were, I guess they'd just been born or something, but those are the two things I think about Liverpool. So he fell ill and he was in a hospital. And lo and behold, he's cared for a woman, a nurse named Mary. Good Jewish name, right? An Irish nurse. And they fell in love and wanted to get married. Now, Amos's mother, Ben Gurion's wife, Paula, she strongly opposed her son's marriage to a non-Jew. So say what you will about the lack of religiosity of the Ben Gurions. They understood that a Jew should not be marrying a non-Jew. But here, Amos, he fell in love. Not only did he fall in love, Mary was already pregnant. So that complicated the matter as well. So with the blessing, we're told, of David Ben Gurion, they're married in the spring of 1946 in a civil marriage. Ben Gurion tried to arrange an Orthodox conversion with Mary, but to no avail. To please Paula, apparently Paula was more interested in this. In 1956, that's a number of years after they got married, Paula was converted by Reform Jews in the summer of 1956. And Paula was told, so Rabbi Muhammad tells the story, and I looked online, the story seems to be the same everywhere, but Paula, this is what he tells, apparently was told that the conversion was a halakha conversion because she himself was not religious, I guess, but she wanted a halakha conversion by rabbis. The couple returns to Eretz Yisrael, the state of Israel. Now it's the state of Israel, and they moved to Haifa, and they had a few children. And Amos was a big man in the police. And okay, now years later, they have a daughter. Well, they have a daughter, and years later, she wants to get married. Daughter is Galia. She's an officer in the medical corps, and she wants to marry this man, a paratrooper officer named Rafi Roan. And they come to register with the rabbinate, as you have to do, and it becomes clear that they could not marry Kedas Moshe Yisrael because Mary's conversion was not in accord with halacha, which means that these kids are not Jewish. A bit of a scandal that David Ben Gurion has non-Jewish grandchildren. So Amos Ben Gurion turned to his father's very good friend, namely Rav Gorin, and asked him to convert his wife Mary and also to convert the children who are not babies now. They're beyond bar and bat mitzvah age, so it's the same issues. You have to accept Torah and mitzvos. He also requested, interestingly, to hide this from his parents so that, or at least his mother, so that she would not know that her daughter-in-law and her grandchildren are really not Jewish. That is to hide the fact that they're converting. Rav Goren turned to Rav Yeshua Kaniel. Rav Yeshua Kaniel was the chief rabbi of Haifa, and I have to say, a very distinguished rabbi. He's the grandfather of Professor Eliav Shochatman, and he's also one of Rav Kook's most distinguished students. Rav Kaniel, because he was the Rav of Haifa, he instructed them in Torah and mitzvos, and he converted the mother and the children in 1968. So it was done and accepted, of course, by the state of Israel, valid conversion. And the wedding took place in 68, not long after the death of Paula. Um, Ben Gurion, he's alive still, and the IDF uniform, of course, is very important to him, signifies what's good about the state of Israel. He asked his son-in-law, a grandson-in-law, Rafi, to wear the army uniform at the wedding. By the way, when Rav Shar Yashiv Cohen got married, he got married in his army uniform, and people said that you shouldn't do that. You should get married. You're a Rav. You should get married, in rabbinic garb. And Rav Tzvi Cook said that this is the garb of the state of Israel protecting the Jewish people. It's a holy garb, and Dafka, he should get married in this garb. So the groom agreed, and so the bride was in white, and the groom was in his IDF uniform, and many dignitaries attended the wedding. Now, let me tell you the words that Rav Goren stated at the wedding, as it's quoted in the press. They said, "This is a triple joy. Your joy as a couple who contributed to the IDF and the nation, the joy of the parents, and the joy of the people." And he says, everyone, we all see ourselves connected to this joy because of whose family this is, etc. Okay. Now, after this wedding, no, no, okay. So now let's get back to our case, the Seidman case. No, sorry. Now, before I get to the Seidman case, let me tell you that the Haredi rabbis also criticized Rav Goren for this case, converting Mary, Mary's wife of Amos, because they said he did this to flatter, Ben Gurion, to get on the good side. In fact, a few years later, they had a rally against Rav Goren, and Rav Jolti said that about Rav Goren, where can you find such a patent? And he said something like that you can just go to him and he'll marry you. Rav Goren was forced to publicize, why what he did. How is this a valid conversion? And what he said then is going to be relevant to the Seidman case as well. First of all, he said that the bride and her mother, and I guess all the other children as well, learned the basics of Judaism. The bride and the groom, in particular, promised that after their marriage, they would run their house as a kosher home. He didn't they're not saying they're going to be Shomer Shabbos or this and that, but they're at least going to have a kosher home. Rav Goren knew that they wouldn't be religious, but he understood that he assumed that in a Shas Adchak and in an era where many Israelis are secular and to prevent assimilation, it's enough to accept the idea of the mitzvos, accept certain mitzvos in particular, kosher home. I presume he gave them other mitzvos to not eat, pork ever, not cook milk and meat, etc., etc. So that is the approach of Rav Goren and many other rabbis. Now, getting back to the issue of the Seidman conversion. Now, Rav Ovadia was attacked for joining with Rav Goren to affirm this conversion, and Rav Ovadia published an open statement which appears in Hamodia, that's the Aguda newspaper, explaining his justification. And let me tell you what he says. First, before I even read you what he says, Rav Ovadia says about that she's a vegetarian, so she won't be eating non-kosher. Rav Goren said the same thing. If you look in Rabbi book, I'll read it, we'll get to it in a little while, he discusses the Seidman case. the whole thing to him is it's astounding to him. What do you mean she's a vegetarian? Who cares? The kalim at the kibbutz are not kosher. So by definition, she's still eating non-kosher. What we see from both Rav Goren and Rav Avadia is kalim is not enough of a reason to reject a conversion. Of course, you can't eat non-kosher kalim, but that's not enough of a reason. Someone who's going to be vegetarian, but they're not makpid on the baliot and the kli, that's not enough of a reason for Rav Avadia. Let me read you what he says. This is what appears in Hamodia. Um, he says, Mrs. Seidman is in a kibbutz that's not religious. Now, if I would quote you the same words from Rav Goren, you'd say, oh, so, if you want to oppose Rav Goren, you could say typical Rav Goren sort of, liberal or radical view. But you can't say this about Rav Vadia, the most important posek of our time. Listen what Rav Vadia says. And after I tell you this, then try to say, look, obviously there's different opinions. We know that. There's a machlokas in this matter, but to act which as many, I have to say it, as many rabbis in America, including modern Orthodox rabbis and modern Orthodox shuls, RCA members, to act like what I'm going to tell you now is michutz lamachane and not part of our tradition. It's just not true. They don't have to accept it, but it's just a falsehood, historical. Listen to what Rav Vadia says. Mrs. Seidman is today in a non-Orthodox, non-religious kibbutz Rodati. Nevertheless, ho'il v'hi tzimchonit, because she's a vegetarian, ein kol ba'aya shetavo lidei michshol b'machot asurim. There's no problem that she's going to be eating non-kosher food. Yes, there's absorption. That's rabbinically forbidden, but that's not enough not to convert someone in a case like this, where remember, the alternative is that the man is living with a non-Jewish woman. She also declared that she would observe the Shabbos. Now, she didn't observe Shabbos. There's no doubt about that. And Rav Ovadia knew she wasn't going to observe Shabbos living there, but she could have observed Shabbos. And then the question is, what does it mean to observe Shabbos? For all we know, she did observe Shabbos in a large extent. Maybe she didn't turn on a television, this and that. I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean to observe Shabbos the way, with every malacha and told us malacha in Shemir Shabbos Kol Chasa. I mean, she made this commitment. And by the way, if in the end she didn't fulfill the commitment, according to Rav Ovadia, it's still valid. Because it doesn't matter as long as she made the commitment and the Beis Din accepted it as if it's a valid commitment. If later on it's seen that it's not authentic, they still regard it as valid. And we already saw the tashbeitz that if you convert and then immediately after conversion you go worship idols, it's still a valid conversion. Not everyone accepts this, but Rav Ovadia does. And what does he say? And she said she's going to observe Shabbos, and she will try to observe the mitzvos. That's her commitment. So she said she accepts the mitzvos. Hold on. But what about the fact the Beis Din knows that she will tamshich achayot im kohen, lo kiddushin, gam achar giura. When they're converting her, they know she's going to remain with the kohen. By the way, they didn't ask her. Because if they asked her and then she'd say, yes, I don't accept that law, then it's a problem. You can't convert her. But they knew she's married to him. The only reason she's converting, or at least a major reason, is because she wants to be married to him. Or actually, take that back. No, that's Rav Ovadia thinks otherwise. She didn't need to. She's already married to him. So, but she's going to be with the kohen. So what does Rav Ovadia say? So the question is, Rav Ovadia says there is a machoket among the achronim. There's a machoket whether you can convert someone who's going to be married to a kohen. So now you're wondering, machoket? How can it be machoket? This is a pashut halacha. In fact, when they came to Rav Goren, Rabbi Rekefet mentions this, and they told Rav Goren that, when they came to Rav Soloveitchik, and they told Rav Soloveitchik that Rav Goren, in converting a woman, it's not just Rav Goren, Rav Ovadia agrees, but that who's going to live with be married to a kohen, and they said he's relying on the Malamed Lahoil, Rav Doitz Hoffman. We're going to talk about this Malamed Lahoil. The Rav, according to Rekefet, says impossible. The Muhammad al couldn't say it. It's impossible that any Orthodox rabbi could say that you can convert someone who's going to be married to a kohen. But the Rav, the Mechilas Kvodo, was mistaken. The Muhammad al or Dois Hafen indeed does say that. And that's what Rav Vadia means. There's a machokes. And Rav Vadia says it's a machokes, so maybe you shouldn't. But he says, but since in this case, the giur was already done, that is, Rav Goren already did the giur, therefore, he chit beit hadin lasher et giur. Then, therefore, our Beis Din, me, Rav Mizrahi, and also Rav Goren, who's on the Beis Din, it's a little weird. Well, maybe Rav Vadia should have, we're saying that our Beis Din is affirming the conversion of Rav Goren. I think you'd want to have a different Dayan other than Rav Goren because he's sort of Nogea B'davar. He's the one who did it. But Rav Avadia says, yes, there is a machokes, implying that maybe I would not have done this. But since they've already been converted, since she has already been converted, Seidman, and there is a position in the Achronim, at least great Achron as we'll see, but there's more than one, that it is a valid conversion. Therefore, we agreed to accept her. He says that even though Kabbalah Mitzvos is likuva, that is, there's no conversion without Kabbalah Mitzvos, and you can't convert anyone unless they accept all the mitzvos of the Torah. He says, nevertheless, in this case, this is not a chisaron beguf Kabbalah mitzvot atzmam. This is not a case of rejecting the mitzvos, because she never said she rejects it. Rather, we can assume that her inclination is going to cause her to violate this halacha din misuyam, and that's not malkav b'diavad. In other words, why is Helen Seidman want to live with her husband, who's a kohen? Because she has a great desire to. That's her yetzer hara. And the fact that she is a yetzer hara, she wants to live with him, even though she knows the halacha says she can't, that's not enough to invalidate a conversion. And we never asked her this, and she never said she doesn't accept the halacha. Therefore, as Rav Vadia says, ein zachisaron beguf kabbalat mitzvot. Lafichach, he says, we decided lasher hagerut shel hagveret Seidman yachad im shnei baneha v'shadinam ki Yehudim l'chol davar, and they're like all other Jews. Wow. By the way, I want to read you something. Here's a biography. I love this biography. There's a few biographies of Rav Vadia. This is the best. It's the most exciting. By Chain and Pfeffer, called Maran, Avadia Yosef, a biografia. It says on page 174 to 175, of course, it mentions, this public statement in Hamodia, and it quotes from Rav Sternbach. When Rav Sternbach heard this, Rav Sternbach quipped, very funny. He says, Rav Avadia asar et hapeyav heter et hanochrit. Okay, Rav Avadia, what he's saying is, Rav Avadia Yosef, he's basically lenient, very often, usually lenient, but he has a few well-known chumras. One of his big chumras is shadels, a peyan nochrit, it's called in Hebrew. He forbids shadels and very strongly against it, and really goes to town against the Ashkenazim. I mean, Rav Vadia even says something which is clearly false. And I assume he knows it's false. At least I would have thought, but he says anyway. He says in one of the tshuvas, he has more than one tshuva. Well, what about all these great rabbis whose wives wear a shadel? And he says the rabbis were powerless over their wives. The wives were doing it against the rabbis' wishes. Which the truth is, everyone knows this is incorrect. And Rabbi Rakefa tells the story when they went to Rav Shach to try to get him to sign a decree against shadels. He says, how can I sign that? I saw the Chavetz Chaim's wife. She wore a shadel. So this idea that the women of all these great rabbis, they're doing it against the wishes of their husband. But that's what Rav Avadia says. So here's the joke. Rav Avadia asar et hapeya, he forbid the shadel, the heter to nachrit, but he permitted the non-Jewish woman, peya nachrit. By the way, there's a book called Hamaracha Ahatzat Rabbanut B'Yisrael. It's a book about against Rav Goren. I mentioned it already. In there, it quotes a newspaper article that Rabbi Moshe Zemer was a leading Reform rabbi in Israel, and he said how very happy he is with this conversion because Rav Goren's conversion is like a Reform conversion. You don't have to require anything. So that's and so the Orthodox citing Zemer as a way, but again, it's not just Rav Goren, it's Rav Avadia. Now, many have said that there's a contradiction between Rav Goren's approach in remember, they say he voided the conversion of Barakovsky, Langer's first husband, and his liberal approach in general about conversion. So let me give you one example of this. And from what we've seen now, you should already know, if you recall, how, oops, hold on. It's not here. I'm going to, hold on. I want to show you this. You will know, I think, already from what we've seen, how false what we're going to see is. Hold on. Share this. I still remember this from years ago. Jonathan Rosenblum, who's a spokesman for the Aguda, open-minded. I've had conversations by email with him. I respect him. I like him. I mean, I'm not sure how it is that a few weeks ago on the Mizrahi Shabbos, where every Mizrahi show in America had a person from Israel, how Jonathan Rosenblum is also there. Nothing against Jonathan Rosenblum. You can learn a lot from him, but he's not Mizrahi. He's identified with the opposing sides of Mizrahi, and all of his columns are in opposition to Mizrahi ideals. So I'm just curious how it is that Mizrahi on their big Shabbos, when I say big Shabbos, it's like 50 different shuls. Most of you listening had a person from Mizrahi, how someone who's not a Mizrahi person, who doesn't believe in the army, all the things that Mizrahi believes. I mean, have Jonathan Rosenblum any Shabbos of the week. I think that's great, but I don't know why Mizrahi. And I asked three people in Mizrahi. One of them a pretty big person, and none of them could explain how exactly that happened. So I don't know. But so he has an article that appeared in this online journal, Cross Currents, almost 10 years ago, almost 20 years ago. And he speaks about conversion. It was during when they started voiding conversions. And this Rabbi Atias, Avram Atias, was one of the people who voided a conversion. So listen to this paragraph. I wonder how many of those calling for Rabbi Atias' scalp remember that Rabbi Shlomo Goren freed, in quotes, a brother and sister from the halachic status of mamzerut by voiding their mother's marriage at the time of their conception. And that was done in turn by voiding her husband's conversion, despite the fact that he had been living as a fully observant Jew for decades. For his promise to solve the problem of two mamzerim, Rav Goren was awarded by Prime Minister Golda Meir with appointment as the Ashkenazi chief rabbi and became a national hero. So this is Jonathan Rosenblum channeling the old Haredi attack on Rav Goren. Well, first, all of you who are in the classes know that this statement that that Barakovsky had been living, quote, as a fully observant Jew for decades is sheker, complete sheker. In fact, in a later post, he retracts this and says he shouldn't have said that. But what about the other thing he says here, that Rav Goren voided her mother's marriage at the time of conception by voiding the conversion? And then he continues later, he says, so Rav Goren, on the one hand, he converts people who aren't clearly not going to be observing Torah mitzvos. And yet, in this case, for political reasons, he voided the conversion because he said that the person isn't religious. Well, first of all, those who've been with me the last 12 or 13 classes know that that's not what happened. Rav Goren said that there never was a conversion. That was his argument. Then he said, if you want to say that there was a conversion, but the basis of the heter is that there is no conversion at all. There's no proof whatsoever. But even if you want to say there is a conversion, the conversion is voided. Not because Barakovsky was irreligious, but because Barakovsky was an Oved Avodah Zarah. And that's a special halacha. We saw this in the Rogachover. Is special halacha if you do not accept the essence of Judaism and you still are connected to Avodah Zarah, in this case Christianity, that means it's invalid. Rav Goren never said that it's an invalid conversion because Barakovsky was a Machal Shabbos or or anything like that, or he ate tarfus. That wasn't the basis of it. In the testimony, we saw that he ate tarfus, but it was the fact that he was still a Christian. And he went to church. That was the basis of it. Now, what about the basis, though, of the Seidman conversion? How can you convert someone who's going to be married to a kohen? So what we'll do next time is, and next class will be the last class, not next week, because Yom Yerushalayim and I have to be at a graduation, but in 2 weeks we will discuss this idea of converting someone if you know they're going to violate it, and especially in particular, converts and Kohens. And I'll bring in some very interesting things about Rav Elyashiv and Kohanim and non-Jews. By the way, this didn't just begin recently. This goes back to the Tanakh. And wait till you hear what Rav Mazuz says. Another one of his shocking things. And we'll end it up, God willing, in 2 weeks. I thank you all for coming out tonight. Let me look at the questions, comments.
In 2 weeks is Shavuos.
2 weeks is Shavuos. Oh, so does this mean that? Okay,
Really?
then the week after Shavuos. Thank you for telling me, and that'll be the last class. I just want to finish up with this and a few tangents to bring them all together. But absolutely, Mirz Hashem will finish that time. Thank you for telling me about Shavuos. I will be Shavuos. If any of you, I think some of you are listening from that show in Stamford, Connecticut. So if any of you are in Stamford, I will see you there. Rabbi Kelman says there's a Nova exhibit right now in Toronto. Very well done and very powerful. In fact, and Rabbi Kelman, you were not at the Nova in Israel?
When I went on my trip, they weren't taking. It was January 24. It was just a few months after the war. They weren't taking people there yet. So I did not go in
So
Israel.
next time you'll go. When I
Yeah.
was there, you heard the rockets.
When I went, I heard the rockets too, but not from Nova. Yeah.
I mean,
In Sderot and Kibbutzim and yeah, but not
oh,
not in Nova. But
so
the exhibit is very powerful.
very good.
Very
I
good.
went in January. I went in January and I did go to Nova. I went with
January
Mizrahi and they took us to
2024 or
Nova.
2025.
2021. 2024.
Yeah.
24.
All I can know it's a group I went at the beginning of January. Who knows? Every week is different. They
I
different.
was there in
Yeah,
March of 24, and I went in March. I just hired a driver to take me down. Lawrence Coburn, thank you for telling. Yes, my memory is correct that her father was Rabbi Herbert Goldstein, rabbi of the West Side Institutional Synagogue. David says, um, oh, so Shalom Cohen was, yes, he was not Haredi. He was Shomer Hatzair. So he was, okay, so he's suing Rav Goren for different reasons. Um, yes, okay, here you go. Thank you. I thought I remembered that, but thank you for reminding me of this. Um, he, there was no conference to Mendel turn and he was a Shalit High Court of Justice case who's a Jew. Okay, that's the background of Cohen's petition that he was famous. He was a founder of the Black Panthers and tore up his Tudat Zahut while delivering a speech at the Knesset in protest of the Seif HaLa'um, the designation of one's religion. Okay, yeah, you know what? I knew that. I don't know why I forgot that. Um, so I didn't know that. Thank you, Mel, for pointing it out. I thought patent as sort of like as a quick thing. I didn't realize it's Hebrew slang for a trick or technique. I just thought it's like do a quick job. But it's the same
Have to
thing.
say patent.
He was saying you want a quickie conversion, you go to Rav Goren. Now, someone privately asked us, can a Kohen renounce his kahuna so he can marry a converted woman? No, he cannot. Kahuna is like the Hotel California. Once you're in, you can't check out. Actually, it's not. It's sort of like Hotel California because you're born into it. Conversion, we used to think, is like the Hotel California. You can check in, you can convert, but you can never check out. So a Kohen is a Kohen, but wait till you see some of these views about what a Kohen can do, because at the end of the day, let's say it's a choice between a Kohen with a convert versus a Kohen with a non-Jewish woman. It's obviously a lot worse with a non-Jewish woman. But the problem is, how do you convert someone knowing so we're going to see what the Tshuvas say about this. And Rav Goren, I'll read you Rabbi Boich. Rabbi Boich did not have Rav Goren's Tshuva where Rav Goren explains his position. So we'll see what Rav Goren has to say on this. And by the way, the issue is there's a shita that there's marriage and non-marriage. A Kohen can't be married to a convert. But let's say he's not married. Let's say he's just living with her. What's the Isser then? Is it an Isser? And if it's an Isser, is it only Durabanan? So these are the issues we'll deal with next time. MJ Franco, you say Rav Yehuda Leib Tzirilson. one of the founders of Aguda, married a Gioris to a Kohen. Indeed, he did. And he published a kuntras about it. And he said it was because of anti-Semitism. I wasn't even going to mention that case because Rav Goren doesn't mention it. But indeed, I will mention it, I guess, next class. It's in his chuvas, the Marc Lev. So we see already it's not, and Yehuda Yitzrosen, you should know, was the Yoshev Rosh, the president of Agudas Yisrael, and a great posek. So you see, this isn't so simple as people say. David, did the son of Helena ben Yamaziman, born before Helen converted himself, convert? It says she converted with her two sons. So those are the two ones. And finally, Aryeh, maybe the reason Ravadia was concerned about the fact she was eating from the tray of kalim was because some hold that our modern kalim are not ballet at all. I don't know. In 1968, did we also look if you have stainless steel? I guess, but I don't know. Do we have stainless steel back then? I don't. As far as I know, in 1968, no one was speaking about this. By the way, Rav Unterman states he's at the same time he says that if you convert and you're on you clearly are not keeping kosher because you're on a in a kibbutz where the kalim are not kosher. So it was understood. The way I understand Rav Vadia and Rav Goren is that that's not enough of a reason. Look, at the end of the day, if she wants, she can make her own food. If she wants, she could have her own pot. Or I mean, in other words, it's possible. It's not, and if she doesn't, so you could say, well, she's weak. She knows the halacha. She clearly is told you need to have it. There's all sorts of ways of justifying it, but the fact is they put the stress on that she is not going to be eating actual tarfus, and they don't even raise the issue of the kalim. I mean, we don't know. For all we know, for they didn't mix the kalim, milk and meat. In Israel, the meat's kosher. They're not serving pork there, and the dairy's kosher. And for all we know, they didn't mix milk and meat. And I can say to me, no, I was at Nachal Oz, and I know they do mix milk and meat. But again, that they don't have to. If they do, they do. But I mean, it's not something that by definition they are, and we don't know. And if you tell her that there's kalim, for all you know, she's going to do her best. She's going to tell them, don't. She might go to the kibbutz kitchen and say, from now on, don't use the same pot for milk and meat. Just like in the army, they keep it separate. In other words, if you don't know factually that this is a problem and it can't be avoided from the standpoint of Vladimir of Gorin, that's not reason enough to tell someone, because after all, you're going to convert someone in their own house. They could also cook tarfus. So it's not like you're converting someone who's a pilot and he has to fly the route. The British Airways route from Tel Aviv every Friday night, and he tells you that's his job. He has to do it, and he can't change it. Or it's a different situation. Okay, thank you all very much, and so I will not see you next week. We'll not see you in 2 weeks, God willing. In 3 weeks, we will be together for the last course of the semester, and as always, we'll bring it to a nice close. And I also want to thank the Sasson family for sponsoring this. I think maybe Ray Kelma thought it was 3 or 4 classes, but I warned him. I said, no, there's a lot of fascinating issues, really also very much of contemporary implications. So I think we'll do it in 14 classes, Baruch Hashem.
Okay, thank you. By the way, I'm familiar of at least one case and more where people did renounce their kahuna and married. I'm talking about Orthodox people who renounced their kahuna and married gerim. And one of them, I saw the tshuva with my own eyes, written by a very, very, very prominent rabbi.
No, Rabbi Kelman, it's not that they're announcing kahuna.
Right.
They're showing that their kahuna, like for Moshe Feinstein, their parents were irreligious.
They're saying they weren't kohanim, but it's the same thing. It's just
it's a problem because sometimes you have one brother who's getting the first aliyah and
right.
the other brother is announced.
The tshuva I saw was sent to me. It's a long story. They asked me if I would do the wedding. That's why I know about it, and I didn't want to go there.
I know a case where the father is a kohen and the son has renounced it.
That is correct. That's the case, and the tshuva was that the son should daven in a different shul from his father because the father says he is a kohen and the son says he isn't a kohen. So therefore,
but Jay, this isn't like the king of England giving up his rights and say I want to marry this woman and therefore I'm no longer a kohen.
And it's not like
you actually have to show that there's no kahuna.
What's her name?
you have to show there's was it Prince Edward? Well, you have to show there's no
King
kahuna.
Edward. That's
Princess
how Queen
Anne.
Elizabeth became the queen.
Yeah,
Princess
but
Anne.
you can't say that I no longer want the privileges of kahuna and therefore I give it up. Just because you
Right,
can't do
but
that.
that's in effect what they're doing. They're saying I'm not a kohen, we don't know
But
today.
they're showing halachically. Now you might reject the argument, but at least they have to show halachically that it's not a cheskas kahuna.
You have to give them a DNA test.
No, they don't do those.
They don't do that. Yeah,
That's the difference.
That opens up a can of worms.
That's a whole different thing. Can you rely on that? For those who know, I'm sure everybody here knows of the Cohen gene. There was someone in Toronto, of course, who discovered it. Koskarecki, and I've heard him speak about it. And he does work with the chief rabbi, and sometimes they do use his stuff to try to solve cases. But
you could still be a halal. Just because you have the Cohen gene doesn't mean you're a Cohen.
No, but they're right. They'll sometimes do to be matir, and say they're not. Don't have the
you
gene.
Can't just say we don't want to be a Kohen, and you could say you don't want to maybe get you don't want to get any gifts that truma or whatever, but you can't say I'm no longer a Kohen, therefore I can now carry dead bodies or things like that.
Of course, but lemaise, it's done. I understand what you're saying. I think, like I said, we are arguing on a semantic level. Like, yes, they're not saying that, but lemaise, that's what they're saying. Anyways, okay. To be left for in 3 weeks, please God, and you don't have to wait 3 weeks for.
Jay, hold before you. I'm not going to let you get away that easy.
That's fine. Okay.
Because if you deal with someone, if my father's a Gadol B'Yisrael, my grandfather, and we have yichus going back to Rabbi Kiva Eger or something, and I'm a Kohen, I can't say now I'm not a Kohen. We're only dealing with people who come from like irreligious families and this and that.
Except the particular case, I know the family was always religious. I know the case very well. I know the people involved. They were totally religious from. The grandfather who survived the war was religious. Everybody.
So what's the basis of the heter? Rav Moshe's basis.
We don't know today. We don't know. There are no true kohanim. Maybe somebody wasn't religious. I don't know exactly.
Okay.
It was a very
weak Lakewood right now.
This is why I wanted absolutely nothing to do with it. But
there's a huge controversy in Lakewood going on right now. Contrasim haven't published, or David Cohen is making on this, and others. Because one person, they're saying he's not a Kohen, but the other rest of the family says we are Kohanim. So it's going on right now. But Rav Moshe had this principle that if there's like a break, we don't assume it. But if there hasn't been a break, you're right. It's a big. It's really going on.
What's going on in Lakewood? I'm sorry.
There's a case like this sort of case we're talking about. Can someone marry someone, or is it a Kohen or not? A convert marry. So there's all sorts of, and it had to do with it's more complicated as I recall, because the girl was converted as a child, or even maybe as a baby. So that raises the issue. But one of the issues was where David Cohen says this person has no chazaka of him having a Kohen. So the opposing side cites all these, all the members of the family. We are Kohanim and this and that, but there was some irreligiosity in the family. So, yeah.
But in today's world, there's no such thing as a family without someone who's not religious. So that's why that argument in other words, again, it's null and void, because you can find in every single family someone who's not religious, and therefore you can be makel on anybody if you want.
You can't find direct lineage.
Yes, you can. There's no family today in Klal Yisrael that doesn't have a first cousin who's not religious.
No, first cousin's not enough. It has to be your parent.
No, but the father, somebody broke down. Impossible.
It has to be. If you look, for example, Rav Soloveitchik's family, you can go. I can trace you all the generations.
Yeah, there are Soloveitchiks not religious.
Every father was religious. And you can find that many families. The cousins don't matter. Now, Hadassah says there was a Kohen who remarried his ex-wife. Okay, well, if that's the case, he's considered a halal.
Right.
And he's not allowed to do it. He did it. But look, we have people do things they shouldn't do all the time. It's, what can you do?
Anyways, it's us non-Kohanim can argue about it. The real Kohanim, it's a real problem. I get it. You fall
Listen, I'm not going to judge anyone.
Exactly. Somebody falls in love with someone, this and that, and I'm not
especially for the family. Look, people do sins a lot worse than that. So
correct. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay, 3 weeks, please God. For see you tomorrow, about 12 hours, a little over. Rabbi Shulman continue his class tomorrow of our regular classes this week. I think everything right going on. And okay, well, please God, we'll invite a friend to come and learn. And Shavuos is around the corner, so lots of Torah to get over to learn in preparation. Always Torah to learn. Okay, everybody, we should hear good news from Israel, please God. And looks like lots of behind the scenes stuff that we have no idea what's going on, but let's pray that it turns out for the good for Klal Yisrael and for everybody, for the world at large. What can I say? Okay, Laila Tov, and thank you. Good night. Be well, everybody.
Lala,
Thank you. Good night. Be well.
Good night.